Vincent Strand stood at the window of the 41st floor of the building that bore his name and looked out at Toronto the way a man looks at something he has spent so long building that he can no longer see it clearly. Behind him on the conference table sat 3 brown envelopes, plain, no markings, $100 in each, nothing more. He had called his 3 daughters in that morning without explanation. He had changed the alarm code to the Rosedale house at 4 in the morning. He had already spoken to the bank. This was not something he had decided impulsively. It was something he had been moving toward for the better part of a year. Watching, measuring, waiting for the moment when watching became insufficient, and something more was required. The envelopes were that moment. Vincent had rebuilt everything his own father had lost. He knew what it was to stand in a kitchen that no longer belonged to your family and understand, very quietly and without drama, that the floor you thought was permanent had been temporary all along. He had been 25 when that happened. He had never allowed himself to forget it. What he did not know, what had kept him awake the 2 nights before this one, was whether any of his daughters had ever stood on ground that moved, whether any of them had ever needed to find out what was underneath. He was 51 years old. Strand Capital Partners was worth $900 million and growing. He had done it the way his grandmother had told him things worth doing were always done, by understanding the cost of nothing so completely that you never stopped treating everything as provisional. His daughters had grown up in the Rosedale house. Good schools, travel, accounts that never ran low. He had told himself for years that providing was the same as preparing. Standing at this window on a Wednesday morning in April, he was no longer certain. His eldest, Catherine, was 31. She held the title of Senior Portfolio Manager at Strand Capital Partners, a role Vincent had created for her 4 years ago. She was sharp in meetings. She read numbers well. She also walked through the office the way certain people walk through rooms where they expect to be noticed, where the noticing itself constitutes a kind of arrival. She answered her phone on the first ring when it was her father calling. She let other calls go. Simone was 28. She had been building what she called a lifestyle brand for 3 years, a website with clean typography, a newsletter with 11,000 subscribers, a carefully curated visual presence that communicated ease and discernment. It had no significant revenue. Vincent had been making monthly transfers to her account for 2 years, which Simone described as operating capital. She had come to treat them the way she treated good Wi-Fi, invisible until it failed. Margot was 24. She had finished her degree in urban planning the previous May and taken a contract position with a small housing nonprofit in Parkdale for $38,000 a year. Vincent had offered her a role at the firm 3 separate times. She had declined each time without elaboration. She cooked her own meals, managed her own laundry, kept track of her own expenses in a small green notebook she carried in her coat pocket. Vincent had noticed the notebook. He had never mentioned it. He called the 3 of them into the glass-walled meeting room at 8 in the morning, not the corner office. The meeting room with the long table and the view of the lake. 3 envelopes on the table when they arrived. Vincent did not deliver a speech, he said. There is $100 in each envelope. That is everything you have access to for 7 days beginning at 6 o'clock tomorrow morning. The house alarm code is changed. Your firm accounts are frozen. You take what you are carrying. Phones are for emergencies only. No borrowing. No calling in favors. Catherine looked at the envelopes with the particular expression of a person who has never encountered a situation she could not reframe into something manageable. This is a team-building exercise, she said. It was not a question. It was an attempt to categorize the situation into something she already understood. Simone picked up her envelope and turned it over. She did the calculation quickly, visibly, her eyes moving the way they moved when she was pricing something. She said nothing, which meant she had already decided the situation was temporary and therefore not worth the energy of objecting. Margot looked at her father's face before she looked at the envelope. She looked the way you look at something when you are trying to understand not just what it says, but why it exists at this moment and no other. Then she picked up the envelope and felt the modest, specific weight of $100 in cash. She nodded once and put it in her coat pocket beside the green notebook. 6 o'clock the next morning, the house alarm armed itself automatically. The codes changed. and the gate to the Rosedale driveway closed behind 3 women who had spent their entire lives inside a particular kind of certainty. Each of them was now standing outside it, holding $100 and whatever 20-some years of that certainty had quietly shaped them into. Vincent stood at the kitchen window and watched until they were out of sight. He poured his coffee. He did not look at his phone. He had asked himself a question 11 months ago, and now the question was walking down a street in Toronto, and he would have an answer in 7 days, or he would have something harder than an answer, and he had made his peace with either. Catherine took a car to the Hazelton Hotel out of muscle memory. The reflex was so practiced it barely registered as a decision. She was halfway through the lobby before she understood that the card the driver was waiting for was not going to work. The particular silence that followed the word declined is its own kind of language. She had never been spoken to in that language before. She stood outside the hotel with her rolling carry-on and her laptop bag and her $100 in cash and did what capable people do when they encounter a new category of problem. She made a list. She called 3 people from the list. 1 did not answer. 1 was traveling. 1, a colleague named James whom she had worked beside for 2 years, picked up on the second ring and said yes without asking too many questions, and she moved her things into a spare room in Leslieville before noon. By Tuesday, she had spent $30 on food. She still had $70. She had not done the math on what 7 days cost at her normal rate of expenditure. She did it now, sitting at James's small kitchen table, and understood that $70 divided by 6 remaining days was a number that required a kind of attention she had not given money in a very long time. The discomfort was not about the money. She had slept in less comfortable places on camping trips she had taken voluntarily. The discomfort was about something she kept returning to without meaning to, which was this. Sitting at James's kitchen table, she had tried to name 5 people she would call in a situation that had nothing to do with work. She had gotten to 2 before the list began producing names that were professional contacts wearing the costumes of friends. Simone left the next morning with her laptop and a plan. The newsletter audience was the asset. 11,000 subscribers was real reach. She had spent the first 2 hours of Wednesday morning drafting a sponsored content pitch to 4 brands she'd worked with before and sending it from her phone on a park bench on Bloor Street. Then she waited. None of the brands responded that day. She walked to a coffee shop she could not afford, ordered the cheapest thing on the menu, and sat in the window refreshing her email. The coffee cost $4.20. She had $95.80. The sun outside the window was doing the particular thing Toronto sun does in late April, arriving with genuine warmth after 6 months of absence, which made sitting inside refreshing an email feel stranger than usual. By Thursday, the brands had still not responded. She had spent another $30 on food across 2 days, had slept on a friend's couch, and was down to $61 with 4 days remaining. The newsletter was not a business. She had known this, technically, the same way you can know something technically without it being real. It was becoming real now, sitting on a couch in a 1-bedroom apartment that wasn't hers, in a neighborhood she had photographed many times for its aesthetic and was now understanding from the inside. Margot left the house at 5:45, 15 minutes early, and walked north through Rosedale toward the subway. She walked the way she walked when she was thinking through a problem steadily, without hurry, paying attention to the shape of things. On the subway platform, she opened the green notebook and wrote $100 divided by 7 days equals $14.29 per day. She drew 3 columns beneath that. Food, transit, contingency, contingency. She looked at the word contingency for a moment, then crossed it out and wrote below it find free. At the Parkdale Community Resource Center, she asked the woman at the front desk whether there was anything she could help with that week in exchange for a place to keep her bag during the day. The woman, whose name was Pearl, looked at her the way experienced people look at offers they have evaluated before. She said there was always something. Margot spent Tuesday moving, folding chairs between rooms, helping organize a clothing donation drive, and listening. She ate a sandwich from the Resource Center's community fridge at noon and wrote the amount saved in her notebook to the penny. By Tuesday evening, she had a cot in the back room, access to the small kitchen, and had spent $9 total. She had also met a man named Douglas Fair. Douglas was 63. He had worked in residential construction for 30 years, framing and rough carpentry mostly, though he knew electrical and plumbing well enough to do both in a pinch. His wife Patricia had died 18 months ago after a short illness, the kind that arrives with very little warning and leaves everything changed so completely that the word change does not begin to cover it. He had sold their house in Scarborough to cover the medical costs and the debts that had accumulated during the months he couldn't work. He had been living in transitional housing on Dufferin for 4 months. He sat across from Margot at a folding table in the resource center on Tuesday evening, eating soup from a styrofoam cup with the focused patience of a man who had learned to eat slowly when eating slowly was the dignified option. His hands were large and scarred across the knuckles in the specific way of hands that have spent decades in direct contact with materials. He wore a plaid flannel shirt pressed carefully, the collar folded down with precision. Margot did not ask about his circumstances. She asked what he had built, most recently, anything. It took him a moment. Then he said the last thing he had built was a deck for a neighbor in Scarborough 6 weeks before Patricia got sick. He had used composite decking, good drainage slope, pressure-treated framing, the kind of work that would last 20 years without much maintenance if he did it right the first time. She asked what doing it right the first time meant to him. He looked at her. He said, "You measure the span before you commit to the spacing. Most people skip that step because they think they can feel it. They can't. Nobody can feel it. You have to measure." She wrote 2 words in her notebook that night. The notebook was open on the cot beside her, the light from the hallway making a thin stripe across the page. Level foundation. Wednesday was harder for all 3 of them in different ways. Catherine had spent Wednesday morning walking a stretch of Queen Street East that she had driven through many times but never walked. The distance between Leslieville and the financial district was not large on a map. On foot, it was a different kind of distance, the kind measured in shoe leather and wind off the lake, and the particular smallness of realizing that the city you believed you knew was a city you had been moving through in a sealed vehicle at speed. She stopped in front of a construction site where a residential tower was going up, framing already 10 stories above street level, workers visible on the upper floors. She stood on the sidewalk looking up. She had approved the financing on a project 3 blocks from here 6 months ago, had seen the renders, had seen the numbers. She had not stood on the sidewalk and looked at the work. A woman came out of the side office trailer and looked at her. Catherine said she had financed a project nearby and was curious about the site. The woman, a project manager named Singh, said she had 20 minutes and showed her around. What Catherine understood, walking through the framed lower floors among the workers, was that she had spent 4 years approving the financing of things she had never touched. She had been good at reading the numbers. The numbers were not the thing. The thing was this: the work, the weight of the materials, the precision required at every level. The numbers were a language for describing the thing. She had been fluent in the language and illiterate in what the language was about. She did not arrive at this conclusion dramatically. She arrived at it the way you arrive at things you have been approaching for a long time, quietly, in the middle of an ordinary Wednesday on a construction site off Queen Street East. Simone received 1 response from a brand on Wednesday afternoon. The brand was a small, organic candle company with a limited budget. They offered her $300 for a dedicated newsletter feature, deliverable within the week. She sat with the offer for an hour. $300 was more than she currently had. $300 was also a fraction of what she normally charged. She had lowered the price in her initial pitch and told herself it was strategic, a foot in the door, a relationship. Sitting on the couch with $61 left and 4 days remaining, she understood she had lowered the price because she was afraid. The newsletter was the only thing she had built that felt real, and pricing it cheaply was a way of protecting it from the risk of being rejected at full value. She accepted the offer. She wrote the piece that afternoon, careful and specific and honest in a way that her content hadn't been for a while, and she sent it. Then she sat back and looked at her laptop screen and thought about what the candle company's marketing director had said in the reply email. "This is good. It sounds like you actually care about the product." She had not been paid to sound that way. She had just written what she thought. The $300 would arrive in 10 days. It did not solve this week, but it settled something else. By Thursday night, the 3 of them had arrived at their individual lowest points with the specific clarity that low points provide. Catherine was sitting in James's spare room with her laptop closed, something she rarely did before midnight. She had $51 left. She had no obligations tomorrow, Nothing on the calendar, no meetings, no calls, no structure at all, and the absence of structure had revealed something she had been too busy to notice, which was that she did not know what she would do with a day that was entirely her own. She had defined herself entirely by her function. Without the function, there was no definition. She did not know what remained. Simone was lying on the couch in the dark, going over the week with the kind of honest accounting she had been avoiding for 2 years. The brand. The newsletter. The operating capital that was really just her father not knowing how to say what he was afraid to say, which was that he didn't know whether she was building something or performing building something, and he had chosen the gentler form of the question, which was a monthly transfer. She had been performing. She had known it. She had kept performing because stopping would have meant starting, and starting was frightening in a way that performing was not. Margot spent Thursday morning at the resource center and Thursday afternoon at a hardware store in Roncesvalles where she bought $16 worth of materials. Sandpaper, wood glue, a small piece of cedar. She brought them back to the resource center and set them in front of Douglas without explanation. She said, "You told me you build things right the first time. Show me something." Douglas looked at the materials for a long moment. Then he picked up the cedar and ran his thumb along the grain. The way someone runs a hand along a surface they are remembering how to read. He set it on the table. He looked for something to use as a workbench and found a flat section of the hallway floor near a window where the light was good. He arranged the materials beside him in the order he would use them. What Douglas Fair built in the next 2 hours was a small shelf. Simple design. 3 pieces, 2 brackets, a lip along the front edge to keep things from sliding off. He worked without rushing, and the lack of rush was not slowness, but something else, the particular economy of a person who has learned that the movements themselves matter. He sanded with the grain. He waited for the glue to set before he tested the join. He held each piece against the light before committing to anything. When he was finished, he set it on the floor and looked at it the way builders look at things they've made. Not for approval, for accuracy. He said, "I haven't built anything in 14 months. Margot wrote in her notebook, beside level foundation. She wrote, he didn't need materials. He needed to be asked. Friday arrived and the city kept moving. Catherine walked into the Parkdale Resource Center on Friday morning without knowing Margot had been there all week. She walked in because she had been walking since 8 o'clock and needed to sit, and because she had $34 left and the coffee shops on the route all cost more than she currently wanted to spend. Pearl at the front desk asked if she needed anything. Catherine said she was just going to sit for a bit, if that was all right. Pearl said of course. She sat in a plastic chair against the wall and watched the room. A man was reading a newspaper. 2 women were working on a puzzle at a folding table. An older man in a plaid shirt was showing something to a younger woman with a green notebook. The younger woman was writing. A boy, maybe 8, came running in through the side door, coat half on, backpack dragging on the floor, and ran straight into a standing sign near the entrance. The sign fell. The boy looked up at Catherine, who was closest. She picked up the sign without thinking and set it back, smiled at the boy. He said sorry. She said it was fine. He ran toward the puzzle women. It was a 30-second exchange, nothing. But Catherine had not smiled at a stranger in a week. She had not done anything for anyone that was not instrumental, not calculated, not connected to what she might need from them. She had forgotten what it felt like to move toward something without accounting for it. The feeling was so small it was almost embarrassing. She sat with it anyway. She stayed for 2 hours. She helped Pearl carry boxes from the back. She listened to the newspaperman talk about his son in Hamilton for 15 minutes because he wanted to, and she had nowhere to be. She ate a sandwich from the community fridge at noon, counted the dollars remaining, and felt something settle in her chest that she recognized eventually as the specific relief of existing somewhere that did not require her to perform competence. Simone was up before 7 on Saturday and standing outside Holt's Coffee on Dundas Street when it opened at 7:30. She had been walking since 6, which was unusual. She was not normally a morning person. She had been awake since 5, going over the newsletter in her head. Not the content, but the shape of it, the thing it was actually for. The owner was a woman in her late 50s named Ruth. She was setting out the day's baked goods when Simone came in, arranging them with the attention of someone who considered the display part of the work. Simone ordered a coffee and watched. She said, "Can I ask you something personal?" Ruth said, "Sure." Simone said, "How long have you had this place?" Ruth said 11 years. She said the first 3 had been close, very close, and that close was the word she used because the other word was too frightening to say out loud when you were in the middle of it. She said she had gotten through it by understanding the difference between what she wanted the cafe to be, which was a place people came back to because it made them feel something specific and good, and what would have made it easier in the short term, which was compromising that thing for revenue. She had not compromised it. She had nearly lost the place twice because of it. She would make the same choice again. Simone sat in Holt's coffee for 3 hours. She ordered a second coffee she didn't need, tipped more than she could afford, and wrote in her phone notes for 40 minutes. What she was writing was not a brand pitch. It was an honest account of why she had started the newsletter 3 years ago, what she had actually wanted it to be, and the distance between that and what it had become. She had not written like that in a long time. She was not sure whether anyone would read it. She sent it as that week's issue at noon on Saturday. Monday morning, Vincent opened the gate at 6 o'clock. Catherine arrived at 9. She came through the front door with her rolling bag, one wheel now slightly off true from the pavement, and set it inside the entrance without explanation. She walked into the kitchen and poured herself a glass of water. She stood at the counter drinking it. She did not go to her phone. Vincent came into the kitchen. He did not ask how it went. Catherine said, "I approved the financing on 4 construction projects in Leslieville last year. I approved them in about 40 hours of meetings combined. I have never stood in any of them." She said it not as a confession and not as a realization, but as a fact. She was reporting, plainly, the way you report something when you have moved past deciding how to present it and are just saying what's true. Vincent poured himself coffee. He listened. She said, "I think I need to understand what we're actually building." Simone arrived at 11. She put 2 things on the kitchen table. The first was her phone, screen up, showing the newsletter she had sent Saturday. The open rate was 41%, nearly double her average. The second thing was a screenshot of 6 replies from subscribers, not comments, emails, personal responses from people who said the issue had felt different, more like something a person wrote than something a platform produced. She did not put any money on the table. She had spent $91 and returned with 9. She said, "I spent 2 years building an audience, and I don't think I've said anything real to them in 8 months. She said it the way people say things they've been circling for a long time and have finally decided to land on." Vincent looked at his second daughter. He looked at the open rate on the phone screen. He said, "What do you want to say to them?" Simone looked at the table. Then she looked up. "I don't know yet," she said, "but I want to find out." Margot arrived at 2:30 in the afternoon. She came in through the side door, hung her coat on the hook, and set 2 things on the kitchen table without speaking. The first was the green notebook, open to the first page. The second was a folded piece of paper. Vincent sat down and opened the notebook. He read the budget on the first page, the 3 columns, the math. He read the daily entries, every expenditure recorded to the cent, including the cedar and sandpaper and glue. He read the lines that were not numbers. Level foundation. He didn't need materials. He needed to be asked. He turned to the last page. It held a rough sketch of a floor plan. Ground level divided into 4 sections. Above it, a column of small square apartments, 30 of them. A note beside the carpentry section in the same handwriting that had recorded every dollar, a name and a neighborhood, Douglas Fair. Transitional housing, Dufferin Street. Former residential carpenter, 30 years. Available, not a concept. Not a proposed profile. A specific person at a specific address, already placed inside the design the way a load-bearing post is placed, not ornamentally, but structurally, as though the plan could not stand correctly without him. Vincent read the name twice. He unfolded the piece of paper Margot had placed on the table. It was a zoning summary for a parcel of land in Parkdale, 3/4 of an acre, currently vacant, flagged for community development in the city's most recent plan. Margot had pulled it from the city's public database on Thursday at the Resource Center Library Terminal. She had written 2 words at the top in the same green pen. "Start here." Vincent sat with the notebook under his hand. He did not speak for a long moment. Outside the kitchen window, Toronto moved through its own afternoon, unhurried, enormous, full of people carrying things no one else could see. Then he reached into the drawer of the old pine table, the one that had been in the kitchen since the Rosedale house was bought, and took out a key. Plain. No tag. It was a key to the office on the 41st floor. Not the front entrance, the side entrance to the building's lower level, the loading dock, the service entrance, the part of the building where the actual work of the building happened, and nobody wore a name badge. He set it beside the notebook. Margot looked at the key. She did not reach for it. She seemed to understand that it was not being given yet. It was being placed beside something to see whether the two things belonged together. They did. 2 days later, Vincent drove all 3 daughters to a parcel of land in Parkdale at 8 in the morning, without telling them where they were going. The 3 of them sat in the back seat in the particular closeness of people who have not occupied the same small space in a long time and are remembering what it is like to be near each other without the protection of distance or function or the performance of having it together. None of them spoke. The lot was fenced on 2 sides, open on the third to a laneway, a stretch of cracked asphalt with weeds coming through the joints, a chain-link gate with a padlock. Beyond the fence line, the backs of buildings on the adjacent street, fire escapes and rear windows, and a laundry line strung between 2 poles with 3 shirts moving in the wind. Vincent got out. His daughters followed. He told them he had been in discussions with the city regarding this parcel for 14 months. He had told no one, not his board, not his legal team, not any of his daughters. He told them what he intended to build. Ground floor workshop space organized by trade, carpentry, electrical, basic plumbing, for people coming out of transitional housing who needed to learn something with their hands and had someone who believed the learning was possible. Above that, 30 units of housing at permanently fixed rents, not market adjusted, fixed, for as long as the building stood. The building would not return capital at the pace the firm expected from its other assets. He had already accepted this. He said, "I didn't freeze your accounts to punish you. I did it because I needed to know whether any of you could see what I have been trying to figure out how to build for 3 years, and I didn't know how to ask." He let that land. Then he asked each of them the same question in the same steady voice. "If I gave you this lot, what would you build?" Catherine answered first. She talked about phasing. She talked about the permitting timeline and the community consultation requirements, and the specific zoning classification, and what a reasonable construction schedule looked like if they fast-tracked the approvals. It was organized and accurate and covered the process completely. She heard it as she was saying it. She stopped before she finished. She looked at the cracked asphalt, at the shirts moving on the laundry line across the laneway, at the chain-link gate that was just a gate, not a barrier, just a thing you walked through. She said, "I don't know what it should feel like from the inside yet. I think I need to find out before I can tell you what to build." It was the first honest answer she had given to a question about the firm in 4 years. Vincent heard the difference. He did not say so. Simone was quiet when her turn came. She was looking at the laundry line. She said, "People need to read something real when they come home at night. Something that tells them somebody sees how hard the week was." She paused. "I could do that. For this building. For this neighborhood. Something that doesn't try to sell them anything." It was not a business plan. It was a sentence about what people actually needed from the things they read, which was the same thing they needed from most things, to feel that someone had paid attention. Vincent looked at his middle daughter standing at a chain-link fence in Parkdale talking about what people needed to read, and felt something in him rearrange quietly, the way things rearrange when evidence arrives in a form you were not expecting, and it is more complete than what you had hoped for. Margot had already walked through the gate. She moved around the perimeter slowly, hand trailing along the fence, stopping at corners, crouching twice to look at the ground. She came back and opened the green notebook and drew for 4 minutes without speaking. She brought the notebook to her father. The ground floor was sketched in 3 sections. Beside the carpentry section, she had written the name again. Douglas Fair. Transitional Housing. Dufferin. Former residential carpenter. Beneath his name she had written, "He measures before he commits to the spacing." He will teach the same. Vincent looked at the sketch for a long time. When he spoke, his voice had the specific steadiness of a man who has been waiting for something and is now working to receive it without making the waiting visible. You didn't just survive the week, he said. You saw somebody. Margot said, he saw me first. 4 words. Vincent read them the way he read everything that cost something, slowly, more than once, until the full weight settled. He stood in the Parkdale laneway, in the wind off the lake, his 3 daughters beside him, the shirt still moving on the line, the city going about its ordinary business beyond the fence, and understood for the first time since he had planned this week that what he had needed to find was here, imperfect and real and more than he had known to ask for. The ground floor of the workshop opened on a Thursday morning in October. No ceremony, no press. Douglas Fair arrived 30 minutes before anyone else, because that was how he arrived at things now, not from habit but from intention, because the work was worth arriving early for. He unlocked the door with a key that had his name written on the tag in blue permanent marker, the first key with his name on it in over a year. He turned on the lights. The room smelled like fresh lumber and linseed oil and the specific readiness of a space that has been built for something and is about to become it. 3 other people worked in the shop that first week. One had been a plumber. One had never held a circular saw. Douglas taught the way he built things, steadily, without wasted motion, with the deep patience of someone who understood that the quality of the attention you brought to the measurement was inseparable from the quality of what you made. He would stand beside someone and not correct them verbally, but adjust the angle of their hand, gently, the way you adjust something when you know the difference from the inside. Then step back and say, now check it. Every piece that left the workshop had 2 letters carved into the underside. Catherine returned to Strand Capital Partners with a proposal she had written over 2 weeks and revised 4 times. The proposal was for an embedded advisory function, no billable rate, funded by a partial reduction in her own compensation that would provide financial planning support to small business owners in the Parkdale and Leslieville neighborhoods, the kinds of businesses that could not afford the firm's standard rates and would not have thought to ask. She still wore good shoes to work. She walked between meetings now, across distances she had previously driven, and her feet had learned the city's real geography, the kind you only learn when you are moving at the speed of someone who has no other option. Simone launched a companion newsletter to her existing one. Smaller audience, no brand partnerships, no sponsored content. She called it Honest Week. It went out every Friday evening with a short piece about something real that had happened in the building or the neighborhood. A workshop student who had finished his first solo project. A tenant who had started a container garden on the 3rd floor balcony. She charged nothing for it. She wrote every issue herself. The open rate after 6 weeks was 58%. When people asked what she did, she said she helped people feel less alone on Friday nights. The answer was strange enough that they usually wanted to know more. Margot rented an apartment 4 blocks from the workshop. The green notebook from the week of $100 was filled by November. A second one lived in the drawer of her desk. Beside it, the plain key with no tag, which her father had placed in her hand the morning after the Parkdale visit, not with ceremony, but with the particular quietness of a person handing something to the right person and knowing it. Douglas Fair had a room on the 4th floor with a window that faced east. On the windowsill, a photograph of Patricia taken in their backyard in Scarborough the summer before she got sick. Beside the photograph, the small cedar shelf with a lip along the front edge, the first thing he had built in 14 months. On the shelf's underside, pressed into the wood with the tip of a nail, DF. He kept it as evidence, not of what he had lost, but of what he had found again, and of the morning he had found it, and what it had felt like to be asked. On a Thursday evening in November, Vincent sat alone in the study of the Rosedale house. The light was doing the thing Toronto light does in late fall, arriving low and amber through the west window, taking its time, not pushing. He opened a side drawer of the old pine table. He had moved it from the kitchen to the study because it had been his mother's table, and it belonged somewhere quiet. The drawer was empty. He did not feel the absence as loss. He felt it as a particular kind of completion. the specific relief of a person who has been carrying something for a very long time and has finally set it down in a place where it is actually useful. He had built a firm worth $900 million from nothing. From the particular nothing of watching a floor disappear and deciding without drama that he would not watch it disappear again. He would keep building, but what he was building now could not be appraised or benchmarked or presented to a board. It was measured in a man who arrived early because the work deserved it. It was measured in a daughter who stopped mid-sentence and told the truth about what she didn't know yet. It was measured in 4 words said on a gray morning at a chain-link gate in Parkdale. Outside the window, the city went on, lit from the west, moving at its own unhurried pace, carrying everything it carried, which was enormous and largely invisible from any particular window on any particular window on any particular floor. Vincent closed the drawer. For the first time in a very long time, he did not count what was in it. The next morning before the workshop opened, Douglas stood alone in the room in the dark. He was not waiting for anything. He was just standing in it, in the smell of the wood and the oil and the quiet of a space that had been built for a purpose and had found one. On the bench in front of him was a side table he had finished the previous afternoon. White oak. 3 drawers, each running smooth and square. He had taken no shortcuts because there were no shortcuts worth taking. He ran his palm across the surface, feeling for any imperfection he might have missed. There was none. He turned the table over and reached into his shirt pocket for the carpenter's pencil. He kept there out of habit, which had turned out not to be habit at all, but something more than that. A way of remaining himself through everything that had tried to change him. He pressed the tip to the soft underside of the table and wrote his initials with the same care he gave every measurement. He turned the table right side up. He looked at it for a moment. Then he walked to the door and opened it, and the morning came in, cold and clear, with the particular quality of mornings in October in a city on a lake, when the season has finally decided what it is.